the bad news is I've got a little bit longer than what you might be expecting. 'Cause we asked for a sort of a double slot because originally Mark Hodds from Coventry was going to talk about maths support more generally, and then I was going to talk about statistics support. So we both want to present kind of two talks each. Sorry, one talk each, two talks in total. But Mark can't make it today, so you've got me, I'm afraid. I hope that's okay. I don't know if Duncan is still in the room, but he did join us earlier. So Duncan, please feel free to sort of add anything you would like to. So it's a talk basically that's been developed by the three of us all together, and the aim is to talk really about the Coventry experience in terms of what we've seen. So the way I've organised this, or the way we've organised this, is to really just focus a little bit on the past and the present. And what we want to do towards the end is begin to kind of set out what we think might happen in the future. So that's the plan. So part one. So I feel a little bit contrite sort of going on about our Coventry Centre. We realise we're extremely lucky. We have a university that's very supportive of what we do. So just to kind of get a bit of context before I give you any numbers, we're very lucky at Coventry in so much that we've got this really large, well, we think it's large anyway, a large maths and stats support centre, which we actually call Sigma. It's been called Sigma for many, many years. And it's part of library services. I mean, the picture on the screen is of the entrance to the centre. It's part of library services located on the ground floor of our library. So we've got a great location that students see it. It's right next to the stairs, right next to the lift. So students, well, they shouldn't be able to miss it if they ever go into the library. I guess the challenge is getting students into the library in the first place. And just one last comment before I move off from this slide is that we continue to offer maths and stats support on campus and online, so we're still offering both, and I'll talk a little bit about that. This is a slide from Mark. Mark wanted to talk a little bit about some of the work that he's been doing with Holly in terms of what changes that they're seeing in the way that students are seeking support. So there's a few little comments on here. Obviously, we all know about the disruption to education and learning since the pandemic. But I think one of the take-home messages that Mark wanted me to kind of put over today was that what we're seeing is increased levels of general anxiety amongst students, not just maths anxiety, statistics anxiety, but overall levels of general anxiety, which is contributing to partly students having additional sort of needs with struggling with understanding things, but also that might affect their ability to access support. And Mark also wanted me to sort of say that they're seeing students sort of working in different ways compared to pre-pandemic. They're seeing students sort of creating more online, informal, online groups and working together online much more now. I guess that's because they're much more used to the technology. But one thing that we're seeing more recently is that we are seeing a return to students coming back in person compared to online, which is quite interesting to hear that other institutions are seeing the online preference being maintained by students. And I guess it's to do with the demographic of your students, which I think a few people have put in the chat. But certainly in the Coventry experience, I think what we're finding is that students realise the benefit of face-to-face support, which I think, you mentioned that online support was better, but I guess that's in terms of facilitating or access to support. But I think what we're getting at here is that support is probably better for students if it's face-to-face, but that's obviously you've got to get over the ability for students to be able to access that support in the first place. So that's some of those messages. So down to some of the numbers. I mean, you'll notice the numbers are very large. I mean, at Coventry, we talk about centre visits. So you'll notice they're in the tens of thousands on the left-hand side. It's worth saying that not all these are students that actually get help from us. They could be students that are in our centre just working and using it as a place of work, either on their own or with peers. But sometimes they're getting support from each other, not necessarily from us. But what I want to point out from this is that we saw increases in demand for maths and stats support, as you can see from the blue line, going back from 2014-15. There's been a year-on-year increase. 2018-19, we did see, I'll just get my laser pointer, 2018-19 slight decrease, but it's worth saying that in that year we had quite a bit of building work going on in our centre. We actually had to move the location up onto the first floor, which impacted us a little bit. So that's why we saw numbers decline. And then the red line just indicates this sort of transition into the COVID pandemic, and that's when you'll see the decline there in person, because we had to move online from March onwards, March 2020. And then this is what's happened subsequently in terms of in-person. Obviously 2021, virtually no in-person, although there was a few bits and pieces when we weren't in lockdown. So it was nearly all online, but we saw nothing like the number of students getting help from us online. But in 21-22, we have seen a return in terms of an increase in in-person and a decrease in online. Now, one of the things I think that's different for us is that in 2021-22, our university was quite clear that all courses should be online wherever possible, but we offered students the option, all courses should be in person, but students were offered the option of online. So modules, classes were run hybrid, but students were encouraged to come in if they can. So there were face-to-face classes taking place in everything, just with online provision. So we did see in 2021-22 a sort of return to campus of students in fairly large numbers, not so, as many as we are doing now, which I'll come to in a second. But I think that's partly why we're seeing a kind of return. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So this is this is an update now. So obviously we don't have full information for 22-23 because we're only a few months in, but just to sort of illustrate how things have carried on this year. I've got a graph here which compares this year to last year in terms of the same period. So the first 3 months of this year, we're seeing about a 40% increase in in-person, but equally we're seeing sort of a similar decline in the number of online sort of requests for help. Overall, it's about a 25% uptick from last year overall. That's the net effect. But again, I think it's worth saying that our university at Coventry has been a lot more firm about learning taking place in person. In fact, it was such that students could only study online if they made a specific request and were able to sort of put forward evidence why they needed to study online, and only then were sort of the online options made available to students in those classes. So I think it's perhaps a little bit different, and it's probably worth bearing that in mind in the context. So we're seeing at Coventry sort of a return back to increased demand for face-to-face and a decline in online, but we continue to offer both, and that's a challenge for us in terms of how we allocate resources to in-person and online, because we can't offer drop-in in-person and drop-in online at the same time and offer the same amount of availability. So some of the things, and one of the things that I want to come to next is it links with what Holly was mentioning earlier on about sort of adapting and making it clear to students that it's okay not to understand things and trying to get that sort of message across. So one of the things that we've done this year is to try and make the centre a little bit more inclusive in terms of making it feel as if it's for all students and not just for the sort of bright mathematicians amongst us. So we've got a range of different things displayed on our walls now, and for example we've got the sort of inspirational quotes, and this one actually is one of my personal favourites from Yoda in Sky Wars, that the greatest teacher failure is, so it's okay to make mistakes. So that's one of the things that we've implemented in our centre. We've also Well, added some additional changes to the centre. We've made the lighting softer, and we're in December, we're going to be introducing some sound baffles into the ceiling. Now, both of those physical changes came about when we had a visit from a colleague in health and welfare who came to talk to us about supporting students with neurodiversity needs. And she was surprised at how bright and glaring the light was, and how loud and echoey the sound was. And she explained to us that students with neurodiverse issues may find that very, very off-putting. So we're making those sorts of changes. So we've learned from that. Some of the other things we've done is to try and seek feedback from students more seriously. So this has turned out to be a really nice idea for us. On all our tables, we've got three different faces, three different facial expressions: a smiley, neutral, and a sad face. Students are encouraged to plop upon one of those into this case here after they've had help, so that the face sort of advises how we're doing. Obviously, if we do ask them if they're going to put a sad face, to maybe add a comment as to how we can turn that sad face into a smiley face. Something else we've done is to devise a Sigma code of practice for tutors in the centre. And that's really to make sure that we're all singing from the song sheet and to make this sort of evident to students. So it's displayed in the centre. So we've got these kind of 5 key points that all our staff try and sort of work to. And the idea is that, we want students to sort of understand what they can sort of expect from us. So that seems to have sort of had an additional advantage. That's partly helpful for us because we do have members of faculty staff coming in our centre, as well as staff that are employed as maths and stats support tutors. So we have staff that are part of the departmental teaching team, if you like, coming in. So we need to work hard to try and get them to kind of understand what the sort of ethos is that we want to try and get over to students when they come into our centre. Something else that we've tried to tackle is this issue of coursework, because one thing we were conscious of is that we were saying to students, please don't ask us for help with coursework. But at the same time, we didn't want students to feel that they couldn't come to us for help. And we were discussing this, and we felt that there was a bit of a nuance there between saying we can't help with coursework, but still saying, but do come and ask us to help you. So we've tried to sort of make it clear to students that we can't offer them help directly with the coursework, but we will try and offer them some help by referring to something else. So we've got that displayed in our centre. So we're making a few changes to deal with the things that we think students need. So what we're doing really is we're doing a number of proactive things. So some of these are proactive. We're running refresher workshops. They're a bit like the back to math sessions, I think, that Ina was talking about at Brunel. But ours are focused very much on students doing maths and engineering, so it's very much A-level focused. So that's before the students arrive. And we're doing consolidation workshops when students are here. So when they start in their first year in semester one, we've got some additional workshops, and we found those to be beneficial to students, particularly given the experiences of some of them. We've run a maths anxiety workshop that doesn't really talk about maths. There's no mathematics as such. It's all about building mathematical resilience. We're implementing diagnostic tests to sort of help course teams understand where their students are at. So 2 of the more recent initiatives are in nursing. So Mark Hodds has been working with the nursing staff to sort of implement a diagnostic test for them. And I'm working with the psychology teams to implement a diagnostic test for the psychology students. The focus there in psychology is on the MSc students because they come with such a mixed bag of pre-learning. So it's trying to understand where individual students are at on that course. Everyone today's talked about demands, and I think Leslie in particular was talking about being overwhelmed with demands. And we offer 1 hour bookable appointments, but again, we're finding that they're high in demand. And so rather than students feel that they can't get help, what we've done on a trial basis is to introduce the idea of students getting a 20-minute pre-arranged online drop-in session. That's really specifically important to Coventry because we've got campuses in London, Scarborough, and in Poland. And one of the things we're trying to do is to help all our students across all our campuses. And obviously we can only do that online. So if all their appointments are booked, there's nothing else left for them because they can't come to the physical drop-in in Coventry. So we're trying out this idea of students can get in touch with us and we can organise some 20-minute pre-arranged online sessions. We say 20 minutes so that it's not a back door to getting an appointment. However, one issue we're trying to deal with, of course, is you probably expect that students require more than 20 minutes. So that's a tricky one to deal with. And something else that we think is working quite well is we've created a network of staff. We've reached out to all staff across the university that might teach statistics or quantitative methods or research methods. We've created this network we call the Square Network. Brilliant title. And the idea behind that is to kind of connect staff, particularly those that might be working in isolation. And it also helps us to share information with them about what the university is doing with things like statistical software, or to kind of make sure we understand what they're doing with their students before they come into the centre. And that's proven to be quite a helpful initiative. And then we've got some reactive measures that we're having to deal with. One of the problems we're battling with at the minute is the timetable of when we timetable staff either in person or online, because it's difficult trying to prejudge when demand's going to be. We've introduced, I can't remember who mentioned this earlier on, but we are introducing a choice of appointment mode. I think it might have been Leslie or Ina, I can't remember now, but I know somebody mentioned that. So students can book an appointment and they can actually tell us whether they want it in person or online. And I've mentioned that we're inviting feedback more often from students. We've reacted to some students' comments that our website was awful. So we actually got a student to redesign our website. We're quite lucky in so much that we've got control over that, so we can change our website. And I know that's not always the case in all universities, but that's a battle we did win with IT services some years ago. I mentioned the changes, the physical changes to the centre in terms of lighting and sound. I think it's actually helpful. We find it is helpful to have staff in our centre from faculties, because students come in and they recognise that it is for them because they see the staff from their faculty in the centre. It's obviously easy getting maths staff into the centre, but we found that having an engineer in there or somebody from nursing has helped very much. And obviously we're currently working on trying to update our resources that students struggle the most with and prioritising those in terms of making them more accessible. Okay, so that's sort of very generic to maths and stats support. I want to kind of spend the rest of the session talking about statistics support, if I may. So I'm talking here about statistics drop-in only. I'm not talking about appointments as such. So what I want to focus on now is the changing pattern of demand for statistics help. And then this will kind of move into where I think things are going to go in the future. So these are consultations, they're not visits, these are individual students wanting help. We've got 3 lines on the curve. It plots the monthly demand, or the monthly number of students that come to us for help in the drop-in. And you can see the black line to the red line, that's an increase from 17-18 to 18-19. 1920, you'll notice that there's a fall there. It was quite interesting that we saw a decline in 1920. One of the reasons why that's probably the case is that we were understaffed. We had a couple of members of staff leave us at different times, so we were always sort of 1 staff member short. So that's probably the reason why that is the case, because we weren't able to offer so many sessions. And then obviously the dotted line is when the pandemic kicked in and everything moved online. So if it's dotted, it means primarily or entirely online. So I'll just bring in the next year. So this is 2021. So this is the year when the university, the country was primarily in lockdown. And with no surprise, the numbers that of people that we're able to see online was lower. But you'll notice that we still saw the same peak in March. Now that we see a peak in March primarily because of undergraduate students doing projects and some MSc students that might be doing dissertations, but there won't be many of those at that time of year. So it's primarily undergraduate students doing projects, but you might also notice a blip over here for June as well, and that caught us by surprise a little bit, and that was students having their projects deferred. So students during the sort of that particular year were allowed to have their final year projects deferred without having to put forward any evidence. They could just request it. So we had a peak there. So what we're finding is that the statistics staff are being very busy in semester 2, and then when they expect to get a bit of a break in the summer, we say, sorry, you can't go on holiday because you've got to kind of see these students. It's not quite true, but it does make it difficult. Then I'll bring in 21-22, and then this is where things start to really recover back to what they were before. You'll notice that this is all face-to-face mainly. So it does include a little bit of online, but not loads of online. You'll again notice the peak in March, but notice how large this has become in 21-22. Now, it's worth saying now we've actually got increased staffing in statistics tutors for 21-22. So obviously we're able to offer more availability, but that you'll notice the demand is clearly there. And you'll notice the same blip again. It's in July rather than June, but I think that's probably because of where the deadline day may have fell for projects, beginning of July rather than the end of June. So the numbers have crept into July's figures rather than June's figures. So we're seeing kind of a sort of a general pattern there, and then bringing in this current year, this is what we've seen so far this year. 22-23, you'll notice that so far demand has outstripped everything that we've seen in the past. So we're preparing ourselves for a very busy semester 2. So what does all this mean for, well, particularly for Coventry, but I think it's probably going to have some similarities for other institutions as well. Well, I think that the future for us, apart from, I mean, I can't tell you if anybody will find love and whether you'll live a long life, but what I can tell you is that at Coventry, certainly we're seeing students from a huge wide range of subject areas. So this was the subjects that some of the students were coming to see us from. So you can see the breadth of disciplines that we're having to support students with. So that's one challenge that's being presented to us. The other thing is changing demand across the economy. So I've just put up a few documents here that really speak to things that are going to impact on us. People are probably familiar with Adrian Smith's report. Some people may be familiar with the notion of the fourth industrial revolution and the idea behind things being interconnected and the demand for data. And then there's been the government's sort of plans for filling the data skills gap. And then there's the emergence of new subjects, particularly like biology. You'll know anybody that works in biology or supported students in biology will know that that's becoming ever increasing data driven. So there are changes afoot that are going to have impact on the students that we see. And I think that what all this is going to mean is some of the following. I think that, as we've mentioned earlier on, I think there's going to be an increase certainly in the short term with students presenting with general anxiety issues, as well as the usual maths and stats anxiety issues. Whether that will come back down again in the future as the kind of pandemic effect works its way through children and students in school remains to be seen, but it's something that we're going to have to kind of tackle. It's probably worth saying, and I think to some extent colleagues here could use this to their advantage. I think it's quite clear that there's going to be a greater focus on maths and stats support centres and the support we're providing in terms of how that contributes to institutions' access and participation plans. So if you don't know anything about your own institution's access and participation plan, or APP, you might hear it called, it's worth finding out, because certainly the plan at Coventry talks about the support that that Coventry offers, and so what you might want to do is make sure that you're aware of what might be in that, because that you could use that as a lever for resourcing if you need that. And I think the office for students, or the whatever replaces the office for students in the future, will kind of sort of make sure that institutions are more accountable for the support that they provide, which I think is good news for math and stats support centres, because I think that's going to be a friend to us, that level of accountability. You may or may not know, but there's people like our friends Emma Cliff and her team at Bath are working very hard with staff at Newcastle to repurpose a lot of the resources that are on Math Centre to make them more accessible, and then Stats Tutor will follow. So that, I think, there's something for the future with math and stats support. I think the need to address accessibility is important now, and certainly will be in the future. Programming is something I want to mention, because certainly what we're seeing at Coventry, and I think it's fairly typical, is that math students are just not going to be able to get away from the need to be exposed to some programming, and Python is certainly the language of choice at Coventry, and I know that Python is the language of choice of many employers. So I think, and I think it's Ina mentioned at Brunel that they're seeing students presenting at maths and stats support centres wanting help with maths problems that involve some language programming aspects to it. So I think maths and stats support tutors, if you can kind of become familiar with a little bit of Python, it might help. So at least you know something. And then just to finish off, a few more last bits and pieces. So skills and data handling, that's clearly going to become much more important, and that really speaks to the data skills gap that's the government is currently addressing. There's lots of kind of support for employers to upskill their own employees, and I think employers are therefore going to be expecting our graduates to be better with handling data and coding. So I think we're going to see data handling and coding become something that's sort of permeates other disciplines. We're already seeing it in biology. In Coventry, the biologists or the biosciences more generally, I should say, they've moved away from SPSS and have moved over to R. So they're getting their biosciences students to code in R. There's the growth in data science courses, which is quite evident, and we're already seeing students coming to our centre at Coventry wanting help with statistics as part of their data science. So that then brings another kind of conversation where, to what extent does data science play a part in maths and stats support? Well, I don't think we can get away from it, because at the end of the day, things like machine learning, the use of algorithms, they all involve some aspects of statistics. Yes, it's code driven, but the students, whilst they might be treating the statistics as a black box, there's still aspects of it, things like they'll be doing things like bootstrapping, which I guess really came under an applied statistics topic before. So I think it might be that as statistics tutors, we're going to have to kind of make sure that we're aware, or at least have some awareness of data science aspects such as machine learning, even if we're not going to be helping them with it directly. And there's even the emergence of things like computational social science. So I think, again, we need to kind of address the changes that are taking place. Then there's things like interconnected disciplines, data science and healthcare, for example, that we're seeing at Coventry. We're seeing other subjects like smart cities. They all have implications for us in maths and stats support, because they all have aspects to do with data handling, coding, analysis, etc. So that's my I haven't got a question slide, so apologies for that. Rather a sort of an abrupt finish, but sorry, that's quite a lot. And thank you for sticking with me if you have.